All right, what's up, everybody? My name is Vince Paikowski, joined today by Luke Ebeling, one half of the 2023 winning team of the Best Ranger competition. And welcome to the Best Ranger podcast, brought to you by the National Ranger Association. This episode today will serve as a reference point for all of you. So if you're a longtime fan of the competition, new to it this year, looking forward to competing this year, today we are just going to reminisce about the history a little bit of the competition and then set the stage for the competition to come. Again, this is your reference point to come back to at any point if you want to send it to family, friends new to the competition and want to gain some more understanding. This is the episode for them. If you're unfamiliar with the competition, Best Ranger began in 1982 when Lieutenant General David E. Grange instructed the Ranger Department to establish a Ranger Olympics to demonstrate the potential and capabilities of the Rangers. The first year was a unit level competition, which tested Rangers' grit and teamwork across technical, tactical, and physical events, and it quickly grew not only to the Ranger Regiment, but to the Army as a whole, and today serves as a demonstration to the ethos at the core of the Rangers: further, faster, and fighting harder than any other soldier. To frame the competition simply, we're talking about 3 days, 40 events, 90 miles, underweight, testing the physical, technical, and tactical competence of Rangers from across the force. And we are kicking this thing off now in October because we want this year's competition to be bigger and better than ever, to demonstrate across the force, the country, and the world that if Rangers are in the fight, you better watch out. And in the coming months, we will be interviewing past winners, BRC coaches, legends of the community, and some overlooked stories around the competition. We'll talk about how to train for the competition, the different units involved, the competition's layout, and what it will take for a team to hoist those pistols overhead in April. But I think that's enough introduction for now, and we're going to dive into what the competition actually looks like and how it's structured. I am super excited today to say that I'm joined by a former BRC winner himself, coach, and all-around good guy, Luke Ebeling. Luke, how's it going, man?
It's good. Thanks for having me, Vince. I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to talk about the competition. I get pretty passionate about it, and I don't think it's uh, there's very few people that have that passion kind of level of understanding of the competition. So it's great to chat about it. Yeah, I'll do kind of like a quick introduction on me. I went to school at Montana State, and then commissioned from ROTC out of there, and then branched ordnance. My plan was to go EOD, but I didn't get an EOD slot. I only got an ordnance slot, and it was awesome, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But at the time, I was like, "What in the world is ordnance? What am I doing? What's logistics? I don't understand how this goes." Went up to Alaska in 425 uh, in J Bear, and had just an amazing time up there. Was the fuel and water platoon leader in the BSP there, and had just an amazing platoon. Had the best time possible and learned an immense amount. And then I was fortunate enough to get to go to RASP 2, and be fenced by regimental headquarters, in the regimental logistics cell up there, the S4 section. Um, so made it through ASP and then got assigned to there without a Ranger tab at the time as an officer. So I walked around, everybody looked at me like I was had like three eyes on the side of my head. But then went to Ranger school, finished Ranger school, and then went down to 375. And there I was the maintenance platoon leader for a brief time, and then I was the Eco XO for the remainder of my time in the Army. So an awesome time in the Army. Absolutely loved it. Wouldn't trade it for the world. Would love to still be doing it in some ways, but life priorities change, and we've got two boys now, 2 and 4, and ultimately like made the family decision to step away from the military, but still try to be as involved as possible. And so one way I've kind of started to do that is myself and a special forces guy who's an instructor at the 18 Alpha course. We run Atlas Training Solutions, so we kind of focus on endurance as the cornerstone of the kind of military and tactical athlete, and then building around that to make people durable, make people strong, make people very capable, on target, and things like that. So that's what we do on the side. And then I also do tech now. I do supply chain. So I'll kind of like wrap it all the way up with that. It was like, a disappointing time. I said, I don't want to, do this logistics thing, but then in the end, it gave me a ton, and now, has landed me a really amazing job in tech, and getting tons of time with the family and things like that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but I'll pause there.
No, man, I think that's awesome. I mean, I think what's super cool here is we've got a guy that was in the army, did the comp, has a love for the comp, stepped away from the army, but is still finding a way to, foster that love for the comp to help guys. And, I think at the end of the day, when we talk training soldiers, when we talk, physical preparation, the competition is a great framework to think of, preparing soldiers for the battlefield of. If we're looking at, the best Ranger competition is supposed to be an elite level competition, both physically, tactically, and technically, as we're going to talk about here soon. What better framework to train soldiers than through that lens of, hey, if you can meet these requirements, in terms of this competition, then you're probably on the right track to be successful in your job. At least, better than you would otherwise be, and the competition doesn't come without its flaws or maybe without some of its limitations in terms of training. But God, if we could train all soldiers, like best Ranger competitors do from January to March or April, the force would probably be wickedly lethal and a little more fit. So that's super cool, man.
Yeah, and I think something that's so unique about the competition is that two-man team, and so in my experience, you're learning so much more about yourself, and how you deal with others, which is, at the end of the day, to me, it's kind of what Ranger School is like you're going in, you're doing something that some days feels pretty grueling and not very fun, and you're kind of being tested on all the stressors, whether it's stress with others, and being in a team or leadership environment, not enough water, not enough food, not enough sleep, all these other things, and seeing like what's gonna make you break, or what's gonna kind of bring you down, or build you up, or whatever. And so how do you bring that forward to the team? And so I think that like same two-man aspect, in the team, in these teams that are going to be competing in Best Ranger, is pretty outstanding. And so you learn a ton through that. And then I think the other thing is you come back with a lot of skills. You're a lot better at shooting. You're a lot smarter on physical fitness, and how to prepare for something that's really grueling and really difficult. How to fuel. How to pack efficiently. How to cut weight from packing lists so you can move more efficiently. I mean, the whole planning aspect, the preparation aspect, understanding what's going into the competition, what you need to do to prepare for it, and all those things, is just, I think, completely invaluable. And they come back as total force multipliers, and they get plugged back into a platoon or a company or whatever it is, and they're going to make a huge difference just based off of the experience that they've had in that training time, and ideally if they make it to the competition, that competition time as well.
Yeah, 100%, man. I think you nailed you put the hammer on the nail on the head right there because when you come to the competition, you're not being asked to master something that is, unattainable or not directly related to your job. I think what's really cool about the Ranger culture and then the competition itself is like you were being asked to master the basics, but the basics across a variety of tasks. And these tasks are, for soldiers, regardless of MOS, to be tactically, technically proficient at your job. This is kind of like the buy-in. I think it's similar to like an EIB construct in that, what we're asking from competitors is to come in and be masters of the basics, whether that is the ability to rapidly assemble a series of weapons from a box, or to be able to call for fire while you're tired, or to be able to run, getting up a mortar even though you're not a mortarman, or be able to drop an HF antenna and get a call out. All of those things are just basic soldier tasks that you're asked to do in the competition. You're just asked to do them under extreme duress, stress, little sleep, physical fatigue, no different than you'd be asked to do it in combat, especially as we move towards, large scale conflict operations as the hot topic. It's, soldiers will be asked to do more with less and to do more under higher levels of fatigue than ever before. So I think that's a great way to think about and model the competition.
Yeah, and I think like one other important point to me anyway is for for these really top teams that we see, or the teams that finish the competition, the teams that do really well in the competition, what you're going to see across those teams is they're very consistently good at all of those things. And they might not be the best necessarily, but they're at least in that, top 15, top 10% on almost every single event, or higher ideally. And they're competing against mortarmen, they're competing against medics, they're competing against, you know, guys that have done breaching, guys that are in special operations and have shot for 20 years, more than most people ever will in their entire life. So you're competing against these people that are at really high skill levels in some of those areas, but being able to shine throughout all of those, I think, is like the key of those good teams, and what makes the competition really difficult at a high level.
Yeah, so if you're just joining us right now and you're like, "Hey, I came to this podcast to figure out what this thing is," we're gonna get there. I promise you. So stick with me. And so, Luke, I think we'll kind of transition here to just frame the competition for people, right? So, I want to take us to a moment on the starting line in April. It's a warm Friday morning, early in the morning at Fort Benning, Georgia, and everyone's gathered at Camp Rogers ready to kick this thing off. We've got 52 teams on the line, or 56 teams on the line, depending on the year. Kind of walk us through who's there, who's competing, how did they get there?
Yeah, I mean, you're there on the start line. You're getting ready to go. You get there at, like, I don't know, 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or something absolutely absurd. And you didn't sleep at all the night before, because all you can think about is a competition. If everything's packed and all that, and it's a feeling of excitement and nerves and everything else, but also a massive buildup of a huge amount of preparation for a lot of these people. They've been laying the bricks for the kind of fitness that they're using at the competition for years, maybe for the entirety of their lives, if we're being completely honest. And so it's this big culmination of the event of, how have you prepared physically, how much have you shot, everything else, and are you ready to go? Because it's absolutely no joke. And the gun goes off and you're excited and you're pumped up and you got a lot of adrenaline flowing. But then you kind of, as you're starting to run, as you're starting to warm up, as you're starting to get the heart rate higher, you're realizing, like, oh, I have 3 entire days of this. So not only are you going from that morning at 6 a.m. and you definitely didn't sleep the night before, but you're going all the way until Sunday afternoon from Friday morning. And I'll let Vince kind of expand from there.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about the day of the competition or the morning of the competition is you have the opportunity to see 52 two-man teams from across the entire force who are there for one reason. And so, I think when we start to frame the competition, it's under this lens of I want you to imagine that across the Army right now, there are processes going on at the unit level to select, maybe one team per division or two teams per division. And so four guys will get the opportunity to represent 30,000 or 40,000 soldiers in the best Ranger competition. And they all come to Fort Benning, Georgia with the same exact goal. And I think regardless of where you're coming from, if you're showing up to that competition, it has to be with an eye to win, because otherwise the competition is just untenable from a mental perspective. You've got to be ready to give what it takes in order to win and to move on day to day in order to be successful. So think about all these teams right now. You've got guys across the force that are hoping to be there in April. And the first step of this process is, going through your unit selection, getting paired up with someone, and getting paired up with a teammate. So from your perspective, Luke, like what makes when we're pairing two-man teams together for this competition, what makes a successful pairing uh, when we're talking about the team dynamic?
Yeah, I think about this in a few different ways personally. I think, like, to some extent it doesn't matter, right? Like, if you're going out there to win, and the person that you're paired with or have been lucky enough to pair with, or whatever, is the only person in your unit with a Ranger tab, or whatever else, like whatever the circumstance might be, if you're going out there with an eye to win or do well, it doesn't really matter if you don't necessarily get along great with that person, or they're your best friend in the whole world and you've known them forever. That's my opinion. But there is a lot of stress, and there's a lot of times where you're yelling at your partner and nearly coming to blows, a week before the competition. And so there's always going to be those kind of ups and downs. Uh, but I think like when I was in competitors week, and you do competitors week for 4 days from Monday morning until Thursday afternoon, and I'm sitting there in competitors week and talking to other people, and 90% of the people out there in that crowd of these 52, where we had 55 teams my year, and sometimes it fluctuates, obviously a little higher or lower. But 90% of those people I could be friends with, I could work with, I could very easily potentially do the competition with. So you just get kind of a different person that I think wants to do it. But then beyond that, the other thing is I think you get from some of these special operations units being regiment, or if you're looking at SF dudes, or dudes from other units in the Army, um, they're generally they've been in kind of a tighter, more niche group. And so I think like you put two Rangers in a room and they're going to work it out, right? They might fight a little bit, they might argue, but at the end of the day, they're going to work it out because they're representing something much bigger than themselves. Where and the unit pride is so huge for some of those teams. But then some other teams may not have that kind of level of unit pride, and then egos get involved in everything else. But at the end of the day, I think it's like if you have two motivated people, and you can get along on a personal basis, then I think you should be good. Is kind of my view. But at the end of the day, you want to be relatively similarly fit. That's kind of one of the biggest things. You don't necessarily want to be offsetting the other person's weakness, because you're both going to be having to do pretty much everything. Um, you want somebody that's obviously your level of fitness. And I think that's maybe the kind of the most important thing there, is because if you're an absolute stud, and you make your partner heat cat on the very first event, that's the end of the competition for you. Which I don't know if Vince, you want to talk a little bit about that, or maybe how your time came to be from one year of best ranger to the next.
Yeah, no, I mean, first I would highlight, partners need to balance each other out, but they also you need to maximize the strength of a team. And too often, what I see, from some teams that show up to the competition is maybe you have a division-wide competition and it's evenly split between physical and tactical and technical tasks, and then all of a sudden you get a team together where one guy's a physical stud and one guy can shoot lights out, but the guy that shoot lights out isn't a physical stud, and the physical stud can't shoot to save his life. And you pair those two together, and then what happens in the competition is you become middle of the road in everything. Instead of trying to maximize a team for capability, right? You've kind of got to make a decision when you're making a team for the competition of, hey, am I going to make a team that is physically going to try to dominate this competition, or am I making a team that is, going to try to clean up at ranges and on the technical side of the house? I think very rarely you find a team that is lights out at both. And because there are 52 teams, the likelihood of you going range to range and winning every range is very low anyway. So it becomes, okay, what is the predominant factor in the competition? Well, it becomes fitness. It becomes your ability to move day after day, to task in the Georgia sun, in the heat, and take care of one another. So in that way, it's like, hey, if you got a guy that's super fit and is going to break somebody off, it can become a problem. Now, to your point, Luke, I call myself like the most average ranger because my first year of the competition, me and my partner went out there and he was fit. He came from a powerlifting background, but I mean, I remember us running a 10-mile cut down with him, sub 30 minutes in the last 5 miles of that cut down. He was fit, he was ready to fly, he was ready to rock and roll. And it was the first hot and humid day in Georgia. We had trained down in Georgia for the whole prep, and it was the first hot, humid day was that day, and we went out just a little bit too hot, and my partner was a heat casualty, unfortunately, on the first event. And that was devastating for both of us because we knew he was fitter. We had done that route, we had run that run under that pace before. We had never had that problem. But those are the variables you can't really adjust for. It's the adrenaline, it's the heat, it's the It's the like anxiety the days before. It's competitors week, baking in the sun. Uh, it's you've gotta take care of these variables really well in the build up to the competition. And so that was my first year. Was out, after the first event at the first competition and dead last place, and that's okay. And then the second time around with the new partner. It was, hey, how do we ensure this does not happen again? And so what we focused on a lot was, hey, Al, my partner the second year, it's like, Al, you got to make decisions about how fast we're going to move. You got to tell me when we're going to back off. You got to tell me when we got to take a step back. And then there are things that Al was much better than I was at. Obstacle courses, he could dust me in a quick obstacle course. He could dust me on the queen. If we had to pick up and move heavy stuff, he was, our workhorse there. He came from a collegiate wrestling background. So in that way, we balanced each other out, but then we also learned how to work together and take care of one another, where we would check in and say like, hey man, I need a clear assessment of how you are doing mentally and physically right now so that we know what we're able to do next and what we're able to kind of pull off here.
Yeah, and I think there's an important piece there about the successful teams in particular, because you'll see some of the not as successful teams, or the teams that don't make it through the first event or the first day or whatever it is. You see a lot of arguing, like on or just friction or whatever else. So like our day one, our first event, it was like a 4-ish mile kit run out, and then he picked up a sandbag and came back, and the sandbag was like 60 or 80 pounds. And it's one of you between you and your partner. And before we even got to the sandbag, or before they even got to the sandbag, we had turned around, and we see one guy. He's literally pushing the back of his partner, like, come on, buddy, you got it. And it's, that's mile three of 60 or 70 or 80. It depends on the, kind of how the competition goes and how it's set up. But, that's just like the very, very, very tip of the iceberg. But so you see things like that, this big mismatch. But then you also see teams, one of them doesn't do well and the other one chews them out about it, and is on them about it. And you really, you can have those gripes and complaints and issues throughout the train up. But at some point, you need to come together. You need to understand the strengths and weaknesses, and you need to be honest with each other. And I think the same thing probably could be said for Al, though probably less for me to JT. But I think, like, I would say that Vince, you're certainly, being a collegiate level runner, and damn near professional runner at this point. Like, you've got a little bit more running capability than Al, and JT certainly had far more physical capacity than me. But being honest in those moments and being like, hey, I need you to slow it down right now, or we need to drop back a little bit. And it's those teams that are also honest with each other about how they're feeling, and they're able to do that. And the other teammate accepts it and understands it, because it's you and that person. And whoever's weakest at whatever event, that's your weakest link of the team. So helping each other out in those moments, that's what you'll see from these successful teams. They're not yelling at each other, screaming at each other. They're, if there's an issue, they handle it, and that's it, and it's on to the next event. That's what you need to be successful.
Yeah, I think, watching guys train and prep for the competition, you often see these teams and it's like two guys training separately and then meeting from time to time to go over things. And that's not what makes a good team, kind of like what you alluded to. My lifetime best in 5 miles is probably 5 minutes faster than Al's lifetime best in 5 miles. But we ran every single run, every single workout together as a team because it's only then that you develop, the little the little nuances of like, hey, I know when Al starts to breathe like this, we're on a clock, and this event better end soon because we got to get to recovery. Or I know in an O course, I need to, come off each obstacle and really push to in order to really maintain contact. And that means I'm going to be redlining from obstacle to obstacle. So it's like the mental preparation of that. But too many teams, think, hey, we'll just train as two individuals. It's like, no, you got to come together. You got to learn each other and you got to work it out like a marriage until you know each other without having to talk about it. So I think that really highlights the team aspect. So now to bring it back, we're in Georgia. We've got 52 of these teams on the line, right? And hopefully they've trained together well. They've put some training down. They understand one another. They're ready to work together as a cohesive unit. And they're from across the entire army. And all of a sudden the gun goes off and day one begins. What does a typical day one look like out there?
Yeah, so day one is very physical generally, and it's also there's a good bit of focus on shooting as well as some kind of technical aspects. But in my personal opinion, day twos have definitely been really rough the last couple of years, physically, extremely physically demanding. Um, but I think kind of generally the outline of the comp, at least as I see it, is day one is totally physical. Day two is much more technical with also some good, physical aspects thrown in there and a lot of distance covered. And then day three is, kind of back to the physical, a little bit of technical, but really like grinding it out to the finish. And so it's, really kind of sandwiches that skills piece, which is really difficult. But day one, especially, you're covering anywhere from, typically 5 to 10 miles, somewhere in there, usually with some form of load or some implement or whatever else. And then you're going straight into an obstacle course or straight into a WOD, or straight into another skills event, or something else. And you're pretty much rolling from physical thing to physical thing. Generally, I don't know that there's been any years without it, but you almost always do a run, swim, run, a run down to Victory Pond, you swim across Victory Pond, kind of depending on the weather and some other things, and then run back up. So day one is just a total kind of physical onslaught throughout the entirety of the morning into the early afternoon. And then generally early afternoon, you've got a good bit of, kind of shooting ranges. You've got maybe some like vehicle ID or using a kind of non-standard weapon system or whatever, things like that. And then your day one kind of ends with a night hold, so where everybody's going to be somewhat grouped together, and some people might be there for a couple hours, some of the top teams having some rest, and some teams might get there 10 or 15 minutes before that ruck march starts, depending on kind of how things go for those teams and for the day. And then you go straight into that night road march, which is, anywhere from generally 12 miles up to, I believe they've done marathons in the past, or maybe even further. So up to 26.2 or further miles with somewhere between 40 and 60 or 70 pounds on your back. And also from time to time, there's implements put into there. And that's certainly an unknown distance ruck. So, you have no idea if you're going 2 miles or 5 miles, or if you're going 26 and a half miles or whatever it is, right? So you kind of have no idea what that's going to look like. And then they've also spiced it up. Like last year, they did a pretty interesting water can carry. They had to complete a certain amount of miles, and then, with these water cans, and every time they dropped the water cans, they had to go back to the start, come back to the water cans, keep carrying them again. So sometimes some strategy there, and then you kind of roll into the night six. So I'll pause there if you want to add more detail or highlight certain things on day one, Vince.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it great. I think when some people think of the competition, they think like this is a race from start to finish. And if you're coming from this from the outside, it's not. In the sense that there's the first team across the finish line on day three doesn't necessarily win. In fact, how this thing's kind of broken up, especially across day one, is there are a myriad of events, and each event is scored independent of the others, right? So let's say, as Luke said, you start off with a 5-10 mile movement, and then you go in, that 5-10 mile movement is its own event. You're graded on your ability to complete that event against everybody else. So if there's 52 teams, first place gets 52 points, multiplied usually by a weight. So every event has a different weight because not all these things are equal, right? If you are asked to just assemble a weapon system, that's probably a low weight. It's a weight of one. It's not the same caliber of event as the unknown distance ruck march at night, which is really going to test a team physically and mentally. So that might be a weight of 5 or 6. So you're looking at day one. I come into an event. I'm going to execute that event. If I take first, I get 52 points multiplied by the weight of the event, and then I move on. and I've got to physically move from that location to the next location. And so in that, there's always a movement piece between events that is sometimes graded, sometimes not graded. But what you have to do is get to the next event in order to complete it. And you know you're on a clock for events that are going to start at night, and you want to get there with as much recovery as you want, so it incentivizes guys to really push. So in that way, this thing, I like to describe it, it's like a marathon. If during that marathon you were required to sprint the first 200 meters of every mile, and at the end of every mile you were required to pick up something super heavy and then continue on. It is moving you in and out of these different energy systems, these different physical requirements. And so you can always kind of come back to this steady state, easy motion between events. But once you're in an event, you have to slam it because you know you're being graded against these 52 teams. And if you are the last place team and you only get 1 point on an event and another team gets 52 points, how do you begin to overcome that? And I think in that, it's important to note that you don't have to be the best at every event, right? But you have to be in that top echelon, that top 8 or 10 in every event if you're looking to do well in the competition. Because having a score of 1 on day one where another team pulls 52, uh, it's like a self-eliminating problem that is really hard to come back from. So a lot of teams try to pace themselves early or game it early. You can't really game it early. I remember before the competition, uh, in 2021, Mike Rose came to talk to us. He's the only three-time winner of the competition. And when we asked him what his strategy was, he said, "My strategy is to go as hard as possible from the gun and win as many events as possible." And it's almost like, I mean, that is like the Ranger mentality in a nutshell. But he's absolutely correct. You've got to be able to push and go. And I think, highlighting some of those big events on day one, like Malvesti, or if you're picking up 3 guns during the one range or doing like a buddy team live fire or the unknown distance ruck march, you can kind of tease out which of these events are likely more important than the other events and require a 100% capacity touch because you want to try to maximize those points or those ability.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and uh, I think in my mind, the only way to really win the competition, or at least ensure you're going to win the competition, is to go out there and go 110% on every single event. And that ultimately is what makes it so special, right? And people will compare it to, oh, it's like the Olympics, it's like a marathon, it's like the CrossFit Games, it's like XYZ, whatever you want to call it. And it is like a lot of those things, and in certain aspects, but it's completely unique in the fact that you're going 100% on every single event. And some of those are physical, and some of those are going to last 2 minutes, and you're going to be at 95% heart rate, and you're going to finish that thing and feel absolutely horrible. And you're like an hour into day one or 2 hours into day one. Or it could be a 6 hour night road march or a 6 hour night land nav course where you're in the dark at night. You've been moving for 2.5 days straight or whatever at this point, so it's all totally different. And then you mix in the aspect of technical and tactical skills. So being able to shoot, being able to breach, being able to call for fire, do medical, do communications, like do all this, this massive kind of round of a multitude of different tasks and being able to do them well. And obviously some of those are like, hey, who's more fit, which team is more fit, but a lot of those are who's more talented in this certain area, who's more skilled in this certain area. And it's not even necessarily talent or skill, but it's who's bringing it the best on that day for that event at that time. And that's really what makes it so special. Um, and and
And
that's why and that's why you have to go 110%, right? Because it's like, and you're finishing that 195 heart rate event, and then you're going straight into weapons reassembly or some kind of technical task, or you're having to memorize a chems game box, and then you're going to be tested on it the next morning, right? Like you're going through this multitude of different tests of fitness capability, physical capacity, mental capacity, partnership, leadership capacity, all these different things. So I'll let you
yeah,
go a little bit.
yeah. And I think, what's really important to glean off of that is almost everybody's going to show up to the competition at their best capability, right? You're going to get studs out there. I mean, we've had guys come out that, I've looked at on paper and I said, wow, this guy is an animal. His single day or single workout capacity is insane when you look at what they do on paper. But it is not just what your ability is right there on event one, but it's what are you able to access as this competition drags on, and you're calorically, restricted. The competition gives you a certain amount of MREs. They give you a certain amount of, electrolyte packets. Water is just about unlimited on the course, but you've got to make decisions on when am I going to eat, how much am I going to eat, how am I going to fuel, and then you have to be able to, monitor yourself in the heat, move under weight. And so, like, throughout the day, your ability to access your fitness declines. And I believe that, the teams that win are the teams that decline the least. Everyone's going to decline over 3 days. Because, like you're saying, if you're showing up to every event and you're swinging for the fences to try to win that event, it costs something. And you can't go as hard the next event. It feels like you're going just as hard, but you can't actually go as hard on the next event. And so you begin to see this steady decline in everyone across the competition. But what you notice as, and we'll come off day one here, as you notice, you know, on day two, when they make the first cut and they eliminate the bottom half of the teams, and now we're talking about 28, or 24 teams, depending on what they decide to carry through. All of a sudden, what you see is like, okay, some of these guys are still walking around like, they haven't been touched. And some of that is showmanship and some of that is fitness, right? Because there's no one walking onto the field on day two after night stakes, after the unknown distance ruck march, after 40 miles, between the ruck march and the previous day's competition, and still able to recruit 100%. But it becomes, is my 90% better than your 90%? And if so, I'm going to have a successful day two. So, as we look forward from day one to day two, day one is largely like this machine gun blast of physical, tactical, technical. Let's test them in a little bit of everything with the end goal of like, we're going to make a cut to 28 teams. And then walk us through like what has recently day two kind of looked like and been modeled as.
Yeah, and I think like one quick important piece there too that I think a lot of people miss sometimes in preparation, especially in like if you watch a YouTube video or a special on TV or whatever about best ranger competition, a lot of what's missed is you do this unknown distance night road march where you're completely ground into the ground, like without a doubt. No matter if you're the best team out there or the worst team out there, you're having a bad time at this point, and you're still trying to, keep it up, keep the energy going, keep the adrenaline rolling, everything else, and you're rolling straight into night stakes. And night stakes is usually a collection of mostly technical events, whether it's breaching or a medical lane or setting up some kind of equipment or doing a weapons box, putting a multitude of different weapons back together, um, something under night vision, or doing a reconnaissance lane or something like that. So you're doing a multitude of technical things still that night right after you finish the night road march. And then again, depending on whether you're a top team or you're a team that's kind of finished later in these lanes, and maybe not even necessarily a bad team, just a team that's a little bit further back in the queue, they might get 10 minutes to refit, throw on some new boots or some new socks or whatever, and they're moving straight into day two. Some people, I would say, max from year to year have like an hour, maybe a couple hours to kind of kick around, reset things, eat, things like that. But that's the absolute maximum. And then you're rolling straight into day two. And day two, the last couple of years, has been in different stadiums, both in Columbus and then now on base from this last year. And it's really been an awesome kind of showmanship of a bunch of different Ranger things. And so, be it like kind of an urban type obstacle course, obviously a big workout of the day. Generally, that's a pretty solid gasser. Potentially some running, around the area or in the area, something like that. Then some maybe strongman events or some kind of like more strength based fitness events. Definitely that day it happen on that day, and those are those are very important as well. And so I think like that's another important key piece. It is absolutely not just endurance. There is a fair bit of strength throughout the competition. Um, and then maybe some other things, whether it's like some kind of simulated shooting or whatever else and then you're also doing your mortar lane, and that's like one of the biggest ones people have seen multiple times. Is you're setting up a 81 millimeter mortar, sorry, 81 millimeter mortar, and potentially doing a shift fire mission or something like that. Maybe not, but my year we did shift fire mission, and then every mill that you were off. So, it's very easy to be off on these sites, extremely easy, especially when you're moving fast and you're tired. For every mill, that was 1 minute. And so some people's cumulative time was multiple hours to set up the mortar, where it should just take you, I don't know, 2 to 5 minutes. I don't know what a good time is off the top of my head, but somewhere in there. So yeah, it's very, very technical. Sometimes they've had for the past however many years, when they were doing it at Todd Field, they would always have the prusik climb day 2, and that happened for quite some time, and now they've kind of shifted it to day 3 generally from what I've seen. But obviously everything's subject to change depending on how it looks. But yeah, the prusik climb is just absolutely brutal, horrendous. um, so yeah, you're doing a lot of technical stuff, 1 or 2 or 3 kind of brutal physical things. And then you're pretty much always doing a pretty serious med lane that second day, and that's usually some pretty big points there. But I'll let you fill in any gaps that I missed as well, Vince.
No, I didn't think you missed really anything there. I think, day one, when I think of the competition, I think of like it's an endurance athlete's paradise on day one. In that you're asked to move all across Fort Benning and collect all these points for all these different events. And even though some of the events aren't naturally endurance events, because you're being asked to move and everything is based on time, it really becomes an endurance athlete's mecca on day one. And then that cut happens, and you come into day two, and day two becomes like an output game. And so, you start to see like, okay, well, just because you can run or move with the ruck doesn't necessarily mean on like this 3 minute output event that requires strength and requires, a very high level of intensity, are you going to be able to access that? And so I think that's where you start to see like, hey, have guys actually rounded out their training and have guys actually rounded out their ability physically. Because I mean, if you think of the competition as physical, tactical, and technical, those tactical and technical pieces are still tested under some sort of physical duress. So then the competition, instead of becoming one third, one third, one third, becomes 50% physical, 25% tactical, 25% technical, because everything is timed. And when it's timed, your heart rate's going up, and they're going to find some way to force you to carry something, or they're going to find a WOD buy-in, prior to executing some sort of task, and that's part of your time. So all of this, it's important to remember like if you can't be successful in the competition by being one-sided, and that includes in your physical capacity. You can't come in thinking like, hey, I can run the wheels off this thing. They're going to give you something that no one's going to run with, or they're going to ask you to do a heavy implement carry with your partner. And I think that's where you start to see some of those teams that on paper you're like, wow, this team's really fast, struggle of like, dude, I don't even know if we're going to get this implement to the finish line right now because we're in a world of hurt. So I think day two does a really good job of balancing out, that other side of the coin, and kind of figure out, hey, who are the contenders and who are the pretenders, and let's shuffle the deck and sort it out again. Now back to the scoring concept, I think it's important to note, like, hey, we talked 52 or 56 teams on day one. Day two, if you cut to 28, now if I get a first place finish, I only get 28 points, right? So I've just cut the available points in half. And because I've cut the available points in half, day two is naturally, unfortunately, less important than day one, right? I've got to do well on day one to make it to day two. And then in day two, I only have 28 points. So if I'm way far behind, it's harder to catch up once I've, gotten myself into a hole. And that's where I think a lot of teams struggle is, they're sitting in 24th or 22nd place thinking that they're still competitive for the day three cut down to 16 teams. And it's like, man, you're going to struggle to get there because the teams performing ahead of you are consistently most likely performing ahead of you. And now there's only 28 points on the board. So even if, let's say you were a 1 to 52 on day one, and you swapped it on day two. So now you're at 28 to 1. Well, you've only gained half the distance for that one event. And so it just becomes a very difficult thing to dig yourself back out of a hole once you got it. And that speaks to the importance of day one. And then on day two, if you're ahead, to stay ahead, you got to keep performing so that guys don't chip away at your lead.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen, especially in, it kind of depends from year to year, but what we've seen in the last few years is you have a lot of teams that are very, very close. And so you'll see that really top band of teams that a lot of times they'll be kind of, jumping and jockeying for first through third or first through fifth or something like that. And that will sometimes continue all the way until the finish of the competition. So while you do get less and less points, those top teams are getting more and more and more competitive because again, there's less points on the table to be able to take from from those other teams, and so they're still gaining not much or losing not much on you at any given time. So sometimes it comes down to a few points here and there. Um, and one important thing I just wanted to point out too is Vince has kind of referred to the cuts. That's something that's really important about this competition is you start with 52 or 55 or 56 teams or whatever, and by the end of day three you've only got 16 teams, and that's it. So 32 guys standing, guys or gals, had a first female finisher this last year, and absolutely crushed most, if not all, almost all of the guys out there. Finish the competition. So finishing the competition in and of itself is a huge feat. And so going from that 55, the past couple of years there's been a cut right after the kind of buy-in, run or run and do a run swim run, or whatever those first couple events are, and then they'll generally kind of cut down. I think that's a really good strategy, at least in my mind, because you certainly have some teams that just have not prepared. It's like, hey, you're going next Wednesday or whatever to fly down to Fort Benning, Georgia. Have fun. Good luck at this competition. And so that's a good opportunity to take those people who could be potentially medical risks or something else throughout the competition. Maybe shave those guys off and make sure that they're actually physically capable of making it through the competition, because even to make it through the competition I would say is a pretty big physical feat. So then you've got after the whole first night, kind of going into day two, you've got to cut down to what is it, 20, somewhere in the 20s, Vince?
24, 28 usually.
And then final morning going into day three where you have 3/4 of the day left, you're cutting down to 16 teams, and that's all that's going to be left by the end of the competition. So that's just a quick overview of kind of the cuts. And yeah, I think it's something to keep in mind that you're looking at these top teams and they're super impressive and that's great, but just to finish this competition is a huge deal and takes a ton of sacrifice, and a ton of willpower and manpower, training, everything else for these teams to come out there and perform that well.
Yeah, it's a painful endeavor if you're still out there on day three, and it's well worthwhile. And I think, yeah, we definitely underlook like the aspect of finishing this competition is something to hold your head high. And I also think, in our army today, signing yourself up and going to the competition is something to hold your head high. I think too often guys don't even put their head in the ring because they're scared of being exposed or of failing or of, not being the guy that they think they are. It's like, dude, from me, I was dead last place in 2019. I don't think anybody knows that except for everybody listening to this now, besides me. Like no one thinks about that. No one cares. Like, so it's like, hey, if you're sitting at a unit right now and you're thinking, hey, should I go do it? The answer is yes. Like, find your unit's best ranger tryout, go to it, and try to get into the competition. Put your hat in the ring because that's the only way we get better as people is to come into the arena of competition and see what you got. And so I think, if we keep, walking this down and now we're talking about 16, we get to the end of day two and we've done all this high capacity work. And I think day two, the sleeper that nobody talks about is that night land nav when you go out there and you're just walking. When you talk about like the unknown distance ruck march, you've got no idea what's ahead of you, man, land nav feels the same way because you're going to go out there and try to find as many points as possible. And generally, it'll be like a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. construct of, hey, you've got 12 hours or 10 hours or 8 hours. Go find as many points as you possibly can on this massive land navigation course. And it just becomes an extension of the unknown distance ruck march. And so guys go through that and you start to see who's there to compete and finish and who's there, already handed in the towel. And I think it's something remarkable about the competition that like through the night you see some teams moving and halfway through the night you start seeing guys moving slower or guys just sitting on the side of the road or teams really starting to, come in with that infighting. And, I'd remind any team going to the competition, it's better to be silent than to fight. Like, it's better to just like in those moments of just go walk. You got distance and there's nothing you can do right now other than just put your head forward and walk. And coming out of that land nav is where we generally cut down to the final 16 teams. And if you're there on day three, that, barring some major injury or catastrophe, that you're going to finish the best ranger competition. And I think that third day is just a, a ton of fun.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the night land nav is certainly something that I don't think gets enough traction as being a horrendous, horrible kind of like hallmark event of best ranger competition. But I mean, there's plenty of people that just sit down on the side of the road and fall asleep there for a few hours, and that's about it. There's plenty of people that are, just out there doing their best, but really struggling. And then I think even the very top teams are really going to be struggling regardless, no matter what. Um, and it's I think it's like it's a difficult thing. And yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it gets enough traction. It's really difficult. And you and your partner go out there, and you've kind of burned the adrenaline from day one and day two, and that's the point for me where I was like, okay, adrenaline's running low, fuel's running low, I'm tired. You're getting kind of sleepy. You're not thinking right. Everything else. So night lane nav's definitely tough physically, technically, mentally, all that stuff. And then you roll into day three, and as long as you've made it to day three, you're pretty excited. It's like, hey, we were talking right before we started this, like if you can walk in on every single event and you can just go out there and finish it, you're going to finish the competition, and that's awesome. Um, but you kind of wake up day three, and generally you're going straight to either an obstacle course or range, or you're tying a rucksack raft, and you're going to throw that out of a helicopter and jump out of a helicopter and helocast. You're going to do kind of like the thing that everybody sees at Victory Pond, going down the zip line, touching the tab and dropping off into Victory Pond, all that stuff. So while it's still very, very fitness heavy, and it's a really tough day physically, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're kind of excited to be there. And you get to you get to see your family a little bit more, and people from your unit are coming out to see it and things like that. It's much more of a kind of like the whole thing's relatively spectator friendly to some extent, but especially day three is like very spectator friendly, and there's less teams, it goes a little bit faster, all that stuff. So yeah, day three is great. It's physically demanding, and then you kind of wrap the whole thing up with a buddy run, which is just like almost the coolest experience ever. You feel absolutely horrendous, and you're thinking at the beginning of the competition, like, okay, it'll probably be 5K max, 5 miles for the final buddy run, and that doesn't sound too bad. But then once you get there, every step just feels like a million miles, and you're like, when is this 3 miles or 2 miles or whatever it is going to be over? But you cross that finish line, and that's just like a huge, joyous moment of everything that you've achieved and accomplished with your partner, and just what you guys have put yourself through over the last 3 days. But before that, all the training leading up to it.
Yeah, day three is just, I think, a celebration of like what Rangers love to do, like obstacle courses, some shooting, walking on the beams, the zip lines, jumping out of the helicopter. It is like almost like a celebration, but it is still very much a competition. And I think, again, you start to see these divides in the competition where, on day three, you see the guys that are there trying to finish, and you see the guys there trying to, earn their place, regardless of what that is. And so I think it's a really interesting uh, thing to watch of like which teams are still hungry and moving and chasing and pushing one another, and which teams do you start seeing are just folding or kind of they're going through the motions on day three to finish it. And I would tell everybody, I would be the first to say, like, I went into our day three in 2021 with a pretty major hip issue, and I was not feeling great. And I went up to Al and I said, Al, I'm the Starby Queen. What if we just chilled a little bit here and saved some for, the next event? And I will never forget Al looking me in the face and he said, we are here to win every event for the rest of the day, and that is our job. And it was like, I don't even know why I let that be an option in my head for a moment. Like, you're absolutely right. But to come full circle, like, that is the team dynamic. Like, earlier that night, I'm pretty sure Al was asleep while we were doing night land nav, and I was just pulling him along by a string, uh, and forcing him up hills. And he woke up at one point and pointed to a road sign and was like, "Oh, we're on Cyclone Road." And I was like, "Brother, we passed Cyclone Road 3 miles ago. We're not even close to Cyclone Road, right?" But it comes in ebbs and flows for both teammates. And I think on day three, what's really important is like you got your head screwed on right, and you got a partner that's going to be driving the bus. And then when he can't drive the bus anymore, the other partner's ready to drive the bus, and you're taking turns, but you're working to get to that finish line as fast as possible. And then the buddy run at the end I think is so interesting because I wish there was a way in the competition to have the first team cross the line also be the winning team. But totally also understand, like as we're saying, like all these things are individual events, and the buddy run is just one individual event at the end of the competition. So you'll see these teams crossing the line at the end of the competition, and you don't know who wins, especially in recent years where they keep the scoring very close hold on like the entirety of day three. You don't know who wins. You just get to celebrate everyone as they come across the line, those 16 teams, for just having accomplished the best Ranger competition. And I think that's a very cool aspect of the competition of, there's a moment in time where we celebrate all 16 teams equally. And that moment in time is brief because then we're going to go and we're going to do the army thing and we're going to see who wins. But there's a moment in time where it's just like, dude, super cool. These 16 teams have cashed it. They did the thing, and it's a celebration there, for a moment. But
Yeah, it's a great celebration, and then you go into the super supper and have some awesome dinner, and then the all the donors and stuff get recognized. So really neat way to kind of wrap up the competition as well.
yeah, so we're gonna wrap up here pretty quick. But Luke, I just want to if you could just give us like two things to be successful in the competition, brief shots across the bow. Two things you got to bring to the competition to be successful. What are they?
Yeah, I mean, one a good partner probably is the biggest thing. I mean, like partially joking, but also not at all. I would say like physical fitness. Obviously, like we've harped on that the entire time. But physical fitness and like you're only going to go so far in a 12-week or 16 or 18-week train up. So bringing a certain level of fitness into that, I think that's absolutely crucial. And then having a good partner and being focused on the same goal. So like, is our goal to go out there and win it? Is our goal to ensure that we make it to day three no matter what? Is our goal to just go out there and show up and hear the gun go off and go for that first run and see how we do? But I think being aligned on those goals is huge and really helpful with a partner. So physical fitness and then having a good partner and being aligned with them on how you want this thing to go is probably the two biggest things I would say.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like those. Obviously, I'm not gonna piggyback on fitness because I think that is that a great one. But for my lens, if I could add two, they would be grit and experience. Don't show up to the competition thinking it's going to be easy. It's not. It's going to be the most difficult 3 days of your life. And if you're standing there at the end of 3 days, you'll know it. You'll feel it in your bones and experience. Like there are ways and methods and manners in which you can gain some experience prior to coming to the competition that will really set you up, right? Whether that's go chase a 50K or go do a long trail effort or go backpack for a few days and feel the time under tension and the weight, or try to, as best as you can in training, create a mini competition of sorts for yourself where you're coming in and out of different events and you're doing stuff for a long time and you're gaining that work capacity and that experience of, hey, my body felt like crap and I was undersalted. Or I did not have enough carbohydrates, or I stopped drinking 3 hours in and I cramped at hour six, and now I'm on the side of the road, begging someone for a ride home. Figure that stuff out before you come down to the competition. So, if you're listening to this and you want to come compete, first sign up, do it. Go win your division, or organization tryouts, but then go gain some experience and make sure that the grit aspect is there because you'll figure that out, as you dabble with experience. And then, as our final wrap up question, Luke, in your view, the competition can do a lot of things, but what does it bring, for the Army and the Ranger community as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's always an amazing display. And I didn't really realize the scope and the impact of the competition until I did it and until I had the privilege of winning it, because you get contacted by these people that, hey, my son such and such, watched the competition and this and that was so inspiring. Or, hey, I was in the military 45, 50 years ago for 2 years and I just wanted to say congrats, whatever else. Like it has a huge scope and impact. So I think that, it speaks to what the competition is and what it brings to people. That it is this amazing display of grit and determination, teamwork, and everything else. And really, like, in my mind, everything that the Army is looking for, right? Like those key competencies and kind of key tasks that every soldier should be able to do: physical fitness, teamwork, leadership. Like you're talking about grit and experience, and being able to hopefully bring some of those things to the competition or to the train up, and then being able to learn those throughout your train up, learn those throughout the competition is just absolutely invaluable. And then you go back and, obviously most of these people are in some leadership position. Just how the ranking works out, most of them are at the very least a team leader. Some of these people are, company commanders, or, battalion XOs, or whatever else. I'm not sure, like, the highest ranking person that's ever done it necessarily. But, these people are in leadership positions, so they're bringing all of that knowledge back to, whatever that team is that they're going back to. So that's huge. And then the other thing too is these connections that they're going to build. It might set them up to say, like, hey, I want to assess to go to selection, or I want to assess to go to the regiment, or, I want to go to XYZ school, or, I talked to this guy at this unit and he had great things to say. I'm going to stay connected and try to go to that unit next. So, like, it creates these relationships and these bonds between, the people that you interact with while you're out there, as well as that, added value and kind of like full force multiplier, to use a very Army word.
We like Army words. Army words are cool. I think I I am becoming more and more of a believer of, if we as a force can get better at mastering the basics, we will be better off, you know, period. And the competition is such a great lens through which we can see those basics and we can master them. And you hope that, like, hey, if you're a young lieutenant and you're going to this competition, you have a requirement after the competition to take what you learned and take it back to the guys in your force. If you are a young team leader or squad leader, you are required after the competition to take what you've learned and take it back to the guys that you were asked to serve. And then, if you're just there observing the competition, like, there's a remarkable amount of content to learn from just watching the competition and take it back. And I hope what the competition provides the Army is a platform through which we can talk about, like, hey, if this is what we're considering, the best, how do we get more people here? And how do we get more people involved? And how do we get more people, to embrace the training required to get soldiers this lethal, because I don't think it's impossible for most guys to come and be a top 16 team. I truly don't. It's a matter of, having the grit, the experience, and then, knowing what to do and what to master. But if we can do that as a force over time, we only get better as an army. And I think, that is the trajectory forward with the competition, and why we're kind of doing this now in October, right? To gain more eyes and ears on the competition, to try to bring the young 16-year-old into the fold that's thinking about what he wants to do next in life, or there's a team leader out there somewhere, that just got his tab that's thinking about, should I go do the competition? The answer is yes. Yes, you should go do the competition. You should go try to be there. There's a young lieutenant out there right now hoping to get his tab, probably classing up here soon, against the Christmas break. And it's like, hey man, go get your tab and then come do something difficult, or try to do something difficult and then go take it back to the force. It's almost like the Abrams charter mentality, that bleeds down into the competition itself. But hopefully what we can do is just establish, a community that is coming to watch, excited about the competition. I know I am. And if you're listening out there, and you're excited about the competition, please, National Ranger Association has a ton of great content that they push. Get involved with some of the other ranger organizations out there. If you have the means, if you're a business and you want to donate to the competition, the National Ranger Association is always looking for donors on the back end here to help really continue to keep this competition an Olympic caliber event for soldiers and rangers across the Army. So, Luke, I'll let you have the last word here, but before we sign off, if you got any closing thoughts.
No, thanks. Thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well then, guys, we'll be catching you guys later on another episode. We've got some awesome guests lined up here. We've got some awesome people coming on soon to talk BRC, to talk what it's done for them, for their careers. We'll have some legends of the community, as I mentioned, come on. We'll have some coaches coming on to talk specifically about how to physically train. We'll have some donors coming on and talking specific, some of the products that are being pushed out to the force and to soldiers, and really try to provide you with an all-encompassing view of the best Ranger competition as we approach it. And again, if you're thinking right now, should I or should I not sign up or try to be at the Best Ranger Competition 2026, the answer is absolutely yes. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Rangers lead the way.